Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes? Matt here from YoVideogames, back again with more E3 2017 hands-on impressions. So, while Microsoft's booth was super packed and not well designed and kind of scrunched and made it hard to play any games, I did get a chance to check out at least one game in the Microsoft booth, and that was not a Microsoft game at all. That was Battle Chasers Nightwar. So what is this exactly? Well, Battle Chasers is an original comic series developed and drawn by Joe Mad, who gamers might recognize, of course, from the Darksiders series, as that was his baby with Vigil Games and used his art style for those first two titles as well. So after Vigil and THQ went kaput, Joe Mad seemed to start a new studio in Austin, Texas, and it, I believe, had a whole Kickstarter for a, well, as you would say, I guess JRPG. I find that, I find that a little odd to say, just because it's like it's a Western-based JRPG. What do you call that? It's not a Western RPG. It's not a JRPG. It's whatever. Battle Chasers is based in the universe of the comic series, but it is not directly tied to the comic line. Obviously, this is done for people like myself who don't really have any knowledge of Battle Chasers going in. So, how is the game? Well, basically it uses a turn-based combat system, menu-driven. It has an overworld, but it has randomized dungeons. So the look and feel of the game actually takes you really back to a Baldur's Gate style of gameplay, sort of isometric overhead, and the randomness of the dungeons and the ability to find materials and loot crafting and all that jazz all just kind of gives off a very heavy, like, classic PC design, Joe Mad sort of art aesthetic with a very JRPG style turn-based battle system. So it all kind of meshes around, but to my great surprise it works. What I can say about the battle system is that it uses somewhat of a Final Fantasy X style, where you have on the top left, or just the left side of the screen, you can see the order of movements for the characters going in. So unlike Grandia, though, you can't say like use a heavy attack and stop one character's movement. I mean, obviously if they die, they'll be taken off the list of movements. But it's kind of nice to have that sort of Final Fantasy X aspect where you can see whose turn is coming up when, and you can sort of plan accordingly. One of the big things about Battle Chasers is sort of its mana build-up system, where yeah, you obviously have HP and MP, but then you have a sort of, again, here we go again, a super move. You have a burst charge meter, and that has 3 levels. And what's interesting is it's not like, hey, you can just do a more powerful version of this one super move. It's, say you have your burst meter up to level 2, well, you can do a completely different move at level 2 versus level 1, and of course I think there's even a level 3. So this kind of comes in handy. What's also kind of interesting is that, as you've seen a lot of the footage, there's like this big giant-ass robot character, and he's going to be in Indivisible as a guest. And what's cool about him is that while he is obviously a brutish tank character, he's actually a healer. So he's got like this super kind of Miyazaki / Bastion for all you new kiddos kind of feel, where it's like he's the organic loving robot, you know. So he's got a sort of like earthy, you know, healing abilities with him. And of course there's like the monk type character who's like martial arts, but he's kind of like an earthbender, so he does like earthquake style moves and stuff. And there's this old man mage who, you know, obviously he's got stick whacking and a lot of magic based, you know, more offensively magic based stuff. So what we got to play at E3 was kind of just sort of an overview of a dungeon. There were, I think, 2 options in the demo. You could just fight a boss, or you could go through the dungeon and then fight another boss at the end of it. So I went with the dungeon demo, where again, like, you start in the overworld, and it's kind of like this sort of like fall foresty looking area, and you go into like an iron mine, a mining area, and the mine is itself a dungeon, and it's full of traps and little things like that. And so you get a lot of like classic PC RPG style stuff, where again it's you know, paths are random, so you can't just memorize your way through. Sometimes you'll have rooms that have a sort of like dark fog of war effect, but it's used in, you know, for example, to hide spike traps coming up out of the ground. There's torches that can't be lit unless you have a flint, and if you find a flint, you can light a torch and use it to find more items. So it's kind of got that aesthetic going for it. One of the things I guess I could say is that they had the coolest on-hand demonstrator for Battle Chasers ever at Microsoft's booth. So there was this lady who was dressed up as Garrison, the main character, and she was a super big fan of the game, but she's also this pretty crazy graphic designer, and she had graphic designed and 3D printed in real time for real size her own set of armor. So she was dressed as the main character, and she knew all kinds of things about the game, and so she could actually help all the people, you know, with the battle system and getting through the dungeons and all that other stuff. So I think I'll leave a link to her stuff. I think her name, if I remember correctly, it was called Vert Vixen, and she's pretty cool. I guess she's done lots of 3D printing stuff, so that was actually pretty cool to see. I've never had someone at a booth who was in costume, and not just because someone had paid them to be in the costume, but they loved the world and character, and they loved the game, and they knew everything about it, and they knew everything about the demo. So that was actually kind of probably a blessing that they probably never intended to have, but that was actually really cool to have. It kind of makes me kind of think of sort of a Disneyland aspect to what E3 kind of could be, in a way, where if you could find people who really love the games that are being shown, and you know, they could, if they had, obviously you're not going to find people who are so good at 3D printing that they can just graphically design costumes and make them look as good as this one was, but you know, hey, the idea I think has merit, where it would be actually pretty darn cool if you could go to E3 and have people who were knowledgeable and passionate about the titles that are being displayed, and you know, even kind of looked like the character. So again, you have this sort of Disneyland aspect going. Nintendo kind of flirted with that a little bit. One time there was the year where they had a bunch of Wii U game announcements, but they had all these little super themed photo areas for like Mario Kart, Mario 3D World, Donkey Kong, Tropical Freeze, Bayonetta 2. Those were all really cool. But yeah, sadly we don't really see a whole lot of that. Most of it's just sort of like the pizzazz of like, look how fucking big our booth is, or hey, look, this kind of looks sort of like a backdrop, or just a really, really big poster of a car, or an actual real car sitting there, and a very angry bodyguard watching, you know, all the photographers come by. But either way, Battle Chasers is cool. It's actually coming to the Switch now as well, I believe. I'm going to assume it's going to come on everything else. I was playing it on an Xbox One X, and I believe it's going to be on PS4 as well, and obviously it's going to be on PC. It would be too weird if it wasn't, so I know it is. Because it's very much a mixture of classic PC Western RPG and JRPG battle aesthetics, and of course you got the Joe Mad art. Some people might criticize it and say it looks a little too close to WoW style, but Joe Mad's been in the game for a long time, so if anything, you know, this is definitely one of the more original artists of this style, doing what he's always been doing. And to be frank, I think it still looks really good, especially in this game, because it kind of gives off that more hand-drawn look. I don't think it's animated hand-drawn or anything like that. It's definitely not like Lab Zero game or anything like that, but it has that way more charming aesthetic where it looks like illustrations fighting each other rather than a bunch of you know, cel-shaded 3D models. So that's pretty cool. Aesthetically, it's nice. I don't know how I really feel about random dungeons. I usually feel that tends to make things feel a bit kind of plain and boring, and I'm not a fan of random dungeons, and I'm not necessarily a fan either of turn-based battle systems anymore. But there's nothing wrong with the turn-based battle system, but I think with randomized dungeons you run the risk of having something that's a little too samey, or things that are a little too basic and not as well thought out as a designed by hand dungeon. But other than that, I think this is going to be a pretty good game. It's another Kickstarter success story. More proof that sometimes you just gotta help fund the games you want to play yourself, because these big publishers sure don't give a fuck. But I'm glad it's coming out, and I think if you like any of the things I mentioned, you should definitely check it out. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you on the channel. Later, dudes.